Okay, so we're starting here in line 460, and we can start with this word turim, which is a tower, although it's worth noticing that it's in the accusative case, so it's going to be the object of something. So let's see what the subject might be in a little bit. So a tower, and then agreeing with that tower, you have this present participle stantem. You can tell it's a present participle from the letters nt in the middle. So a tower standing in praecipiti. In praecipiti, in plus ablative, means on a sheer edge. So a tower standing on a sheer edge, and quae, having been raised, that's a ductam, perfect passive participle, having been raised up, we might say, and then from the top of the palace, essentially. So from is captured just by the ablative case, sumis is the top, and tektis is the palace, literally the roofs, but let's say the palace. And then in addition to that, you've got the phrase sub astra, sub plus accusative, meaning under the stars. Under the stars just implies that it's very, very high up. So just to go through that bit again, a tower standing on a sheer edge and raised up from the top of the palace under the stars. So we're talking about a very, very high tower here. And then we get a bit more description of it. Unde, from where. Omnis Troia, all Troy. And et, the naves, the ships, of the Danaans. So Danaum is genitive plural. And remember that the Danaans are the Greeks. So from where all Troy and the Danaans' ships, and the Achaica castra, the Achaean camp. And remember again, Achaean is just another word for Greek. So from where all Troy and the Danaans' ships and the Achaean camp were accustomed. This is solitai, which is it's from a deponent verb, or technically a semi-deponent verb. So it looks passive, but it has an active meaning. So solitai is short for solitai sunt, and it just means were accustomed, and then it's going to be followed by an infinitive, which is videri, and that means to be seen. So it's a present passive infinitive. Okay, so just to go through that bit again. So a tower standing on a sheer edge and raised up from the top of the palace under the stars, from where all Troy and the Danaans' ships and the Achaean camp were accustomed to be seen. So it's a very, very high tower from which you can see lots of things. And finally, we find out why the tower is in the accusative case, because we have this perfect active participle from a deponent verb, adgressi, which means having attacked. So the idea is having attacked this tower with iron, ferro, i.e. with their swords or something, and then kirkum here is an adverb meaning all around. So it's not kirkum plus accusative, it just means all around. Where, qua, so they're attacking it where the highest stories, so summa means highest and tabulata are stories, not like stories that you tell, but stories like levels of a house. So where the highest stories or floors were giving, dabant, you can tell that that's imperfect tense because of the BA, were giving or were offering, and then the object is labantis juncturas. Now labantis, which in prose would be labantes, means sort of yielding. And then juncturas, like the word juncture in English, and junction means adjoining, right, where two things meet. So where the highest stories were offering yielding joinings. And so, in other words, they're sort of attacking this tower with swords at a point where it's connected a bit loosely to the rest of the palace, right, where they can really dig their swords in. So they're attacking this tower. And then we finally get to the main verb, convellimus. We wrenched it from, and the idea of from comes from the ablative case, altis sedibus. Altis meaning high, and sedibus here, even though it's plural, I would translate it as position. So we wrenched it from its high position, and quer, we impulimus, we drove it forwards. So what's actually going on here? So these are Aeneas and the other Trojans right up on the roof at the top of the palace. There's a very, very tall tower next to them, and they think if we just can cut this tower loose, it will come crashing down on the Greeks who are below. Right, that's the idea. So just to go through it quickly one more time. So a tower standing on a sheer edge and raised up from the top of the palace under the stars, from where all Troy and the Danaan ships and the Achaean camp were accustomed to be seen, having attacked it with iron all around, where the highest stories were offering yielding joinings, we wrenched it from its high position and drove it forward. And then after the semicolon, you have ea, which means it. It's feminine because it's referring to the tower, which is feminine. So it. And then you've got a PAP, perfect active participle, lapsa, which comes from a deponent verb. So having fallen, and then repente is an adverb that means suddenly, like subito. So having fallen suddenly, it drags or trails, ruinam, ruin, accusative case, cum sonetu, cum plus ablative, with a noise. And it incidit, it crashes down, late, widely, that's an adverb from the adjective latus, it crashes widely over, super plus accusative, the ranks, agmina, of the Danaans. So Danaum, genitive plural. So in other words, this tower does indeed come crashing down on the Greeks, as Aeneas and the others hoped that it would do. So we think for a moment, this is good. This is a bit of victory for the Trojans. But, and in line 467, we get this word ast, which is a very strong Latin word meaning but. And so this, or you could say and yet, right? And this tells us that actually it's not a successful plan really, because we're told, and yet, others, alii, subeunt, come up, right? So, okay, they've killed some Greeks with this tower, but there's just so many Greeks. So as soon as those ones are killed, more Greeks just come along. So, others come up, nor, nec, meanwhile, interea, do rocks, saxa, nor, nec, any kind, ullum genus, any kind, of missiles, telorum, of missiles, and then the main verb is cessat, cease, or stop. So the point is that, okay, they've killed a few Greeks, but Greeks keep on coming and the battle just keeps on going. There's no break whatsoever. Okay, so now we go into the next line here, which is line 469. And I think we can start actually with ante. Ante plus accusative means before or in front of. And I think here it's in front of. So in front of the entrance itself, vestibulum ipsum, or you could say in front of the very entrance. And quer, in plus ablative, in primo limine, on the first threshold. So we're talking about the very front door of the palace here. And we have a new subject in line 469, Pyrrhus exultat, Pyrrhus exults. Now Pyrrhus, he's a character we haven't met yet. He's a Greek. He is an important Greek because he is the son of Achilles, right? Achilles was the greatest Greek warrior at Troy, only vulnerable in his heel, but he was killed. He was shot in the heel by the Trojan Paris. He is now dead by this point, but his son Pyrrhus has arrived to kind of take his place. So, in front of the very entrance, and on the first threshold, Pyrrhus exults, shimmering, coruscus, shimmering or flashing, with, and we're going to have a few ablatives here, with teles, with weapons, and with aena lucer. Now, aena is an adjective which means made of bronze, and lucer literally means light. So, what is light made of bronze? I think the idea is this is the light that is reflecting off his armour. So you could say shimmering with weapons and bronze reflection, something like that. Okay, now line 471, we go into another simile. So qualis means just as or even as. So it's an adjective referring to Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus is just like when, ubi, a snake, coluber. This is another word for snake. We've seen quite a few already. We've seen anguis, we've seen serpens, we've seen draco, and this is another word for snake. So even as when a snake, in lucem, in plus accusative, into the light, and then pastus is it's sort of a, well, it's a perfect participle. You could treat it as active or passive. Let's call it passive here. Fed on, right? And that takes accusative. So a snake fed on mala gramina. Mala means bad. Gramina are grasses. And I think here bad grasses means kind of poisonous grasses. This reflects an ancient belief that snakes were venomous because they'd kind of absorbed the venom from kind of poisonous herbs and stuff that they ate. So even as when a snake, into the light, having been fed on poisonous grasses, whom, so quem is the accusative of qui quae quod, and it's masculine, referring to the snake, so whom the frigida bruma, frigida is cold, and bruma is a word for winter. It's not the most common word for winter, which is hiems, but it is a word for winter. So, whom the cold winter was concealing, tegebat, and you can tell that this is imperfect tense from the ba in the ending. So, whom the cold winter was concealing, swollen, that's tumidum, swollen. Accusative, masculine, singular, agreeing with quem there. So whom the cold winter was concealing, swollen sub terra, sub plus ablative, under the ground. So this is a kind of scary image of a snake that's been sort of hibernating under the ground, but is now coming up in lucem, into the light. Okay, so now, nunc, that's the beginning of line 473, now. And then we have an ablative absolute, exuiis. Exuiis is the noun, the ablative noun, and it means the slough. Slough, S-L-O-U-G-H, means the old skin that a snake sheds. Okay, so with the slough having been posites, having been set aside, having been cast away, with the slough set aside, new, novus, and quer, shining, nitidus, with youth, juenta, new and shining with youth. And then we have another ablative absolute, with uplifted chest. So sublato means raised up or uplifted, and pectore is a chest. So with uplifted chest, he rolls, convoluit, his slippery back, right? Now slippery is lubrica, right? As in words like lubricate and lubricant in English. And then terga, although it's grammatically plural, I would translate it as singular. He rolls his slippery back, arduous, towering, right? Arduous means sort of high or steep, and it's where we get the word arduous from in English, right? If something is arduous, it's very difficult, like climbing a steep mountain or something. So towering, ad solem, towards the sun, ad plus accusative, and et, with, and we have an ablative phrase here, trisulcis means three-forked, and then linguis is a tongue. Technically, this is plural, grammatically speaking, but again, I would translate it as singular. And then micat is the main verb. It means flickers. And then ore is ablative of os, so that means from its mouth. Okay, so I'll just go through that simile again here from qualis in line 471, because it is quite difficult here. So even as, when a snake, into the light, having been fed on poisonous grasses, whom the cold winter was concealing swollen under the ground, now, with its slough set aside, new and shining with youth, with uplifted chest, he rolls his slippery back, towering towards the sun, and with three-forked tongue flickers from his mouth.